One little girl stopped speaking, but the dog still heard her. Autumn had painted the rooftops gold, but inside that quiet house on Willow Street, the silence was thick, heavy with questions no one dared to ask. Each afternoon as the school bus hissed away, a retired K-9 named Shadow would rise from the porch, ears perked, nose twitching, not at the wind, but at the weight the little girl carried in her steps. Her name was Lila, 7 years old, and shrinking a little more every day. She didn't cry, she didn't fight back, but one afternoon she whispered, barely a breath, "Please, make it stop." No one else heard, but Shadow did. What he uncovered would lead her father, a grieving soldier, into the shadows of a schoolroom, and into a system that thrived on silence. This isn't just a story about bullying. It's a story about the moment a dog refused to look away, and a father chose to fight, not with weapons, but with truth. Wakefield, Oregon was known for two things in early October: the smell of damp pine clinging to porch railings, and the heavy morning fog that draped itself over every rooftop like an old wool coat. The town was small, barely 5,000 people, lined with maple trees turning burnt orange, and houses that still bore the soft sigh of summer leaving. On this particular morning, the wind had the bite of incoming rain, and the skies held that slate-gray tone that made even morning coffee feel like a form of comfort. Logan Carter stood at the kitchen counter of his single-story home, a hand wrapped around a ceramic mug. He was a tall man in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, but thinning slightly at the waist. His military posture had softened over the years, especially since he left the service, but it still lingered in how he stood. Always alert, always grounded. His dark brown hair had begun to gray at the temples, and he hadn't shaved in 2 days, leaving a shadow across his strong jawline. His eyes, though, were the most telling, stormy blue and always scanning, as if expecting the world to throw something at him at any moment. His daughter, Lila, hadn't spoken a word all morning. She sat curled at the end of the kitchen bench, knees up under her faded pink hoodie, her small hands cupped around a glass of orange juice she hadn't touched. At 7 years old, Lila Carter looked smaller than other kids her age. Her frame was delicate, almost wispy, and her light brown hair fell in soft tangles around her face. Her eyes, once full of questions and silly dreams, now seemed older than they should have been, ringed with subtle shadows, as though her nights were filled with things that kept her from rest. She hadn't looked at Logan once. This wasn't new. Over the past 3 weeks, ever since the school year began, Lila had grown quieter. At first, Logan thought it was just nerves, a new grade, new teacher, new kids, but now he was certain something was wrong. There were bruises too. Faint, roundish marks on her forearms, and once across her rib cage when he helped her change into pajamas. She always had a different story. "I bumped the wall," or "I tripped on the stairs." Last Thursday, her backpack was smeared with what looked like dried mud, and a faint scent he couldn't quite place. Something foul, like wet leaves left too long in a gutter. And then there was Shadow. The old dog was sitting by the door, his ears perked, but his body still, like a statue cast in loyalty. Shadow was a German shepherd, 8 years old and grizzled around the muzzle, with a black and tan coat that had faded in places. He had served with Logan overseas in 2 tours, trained for scent detection, search and rescue, and protection. Even in retirement, Shadow remained sharp, especially when it came to his new mission, watching over Lila. This morning, Shadow had gone to the backpack first. He sniffed the fabric in long, thoughtful pulls, then gave a low, uneasy whine, and nudged the bottom zipper with his nose. When Logan stepped closer, the dog sat back on his haunches and looked up at him. Not with fear, but with something colder, suspicion, warning. Logan glanced over at his daughter. "Did something happen at school yesterday?" he asked gently, his voice a shade above a whisper. Lila didn't answer. She kept her gaze down, running a finger along the rim of her juice glass. Shadow gave a soft huff and padded over to her side, resting his chin on the bench beside her thigh. She didn't flinch, but she didn't pet him either. Logan tried again. "Did someone say something mean?" A small shake of the head. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" No response. The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't the quiet of routine or comfort. It was the kind that wrapped around your ribs and squeezed, the kind soldiers knew well when a comrade stopped moving beside them. Logan felt it press on his lungs. He crossed the kitchen, knelt in front of her, and gently took the glass from her hands. "You're not in trouble, sweetheart. His voice caught. He cleared his throat. "I just want to help." Still nothing. Her eyes flicked up to meet his for the briefest second, just long enough for him to see something raw beneath them. Then they dropped again. Logan stood slowly, pushing a hand through his hair. He had never felt so powerless. When Sarah was alive, mornings were noisy. She was light-hearted, thin, and graceful with a soft laugh that filled rooms without effort. She had been an elementary school teacher, beloved by students, always patient, the kind of woman who made grocery clerks smile and handed out Band-Aids to neighbor kids. Her death had been sudden. Aneurysm, a silent thief that stole her in a matter of minutes while folding laundry. Lila had been 5. Logan remembered the exact moment he told her, the way her small body stiffened like she didn't understand, and then screamed like she did. That scream had haunted him for 2 years. Now, her silence haunted him more. Logan walked into the hallway and returned with a small plastic box, the kind that once held his military gear. Inside was a recording device no larger than a car key. It had survived dust storms and raids, tucked into his vest pocket. He held it in his palm for a moment, hesitating. He didn't want to spy on his daughter, but something in his gut told him this wasn't just about bullying or playground teasing. He moved to the coat rack and found her school cardigan, a light blue one, frayed at the cuffs. Using a needle and thread, he carefully stitched the device into the inner lining of the collar behind the fleece. It wouldn't hurt her. She wouldn't even know it was there. Shadow watched him the whole time, not moving, just following every stitch with unblinking eyes. Logan finished, buttoned the sweater back up, and laid it over the back of Lila's chair. "It's getting colder," he said. "Wear this, okay?" Lila nodded but said nothing. She stood, shouldered her backpack slowly, and allowed Logan to guide her arms into the sleeves. "I'll walk you to the bus," he offered, and to his surprise, she nodded again. Outside, the fog was thick enough to blur the pine trees across the street. Leaves scattered along the pavement, sticking wetly to the soles of Logan's boots. The school bus arrived with a low groan and a hiss of brakes. Lila climbed on without turning back. Logan stood at the curb until the bus disappeared into the mist. Shadow stood beside him, ears forward, body tense. They were both soldiers, waiting for the enemy to show its face. The next morning arrived without fanfare. The sky above Wakefield was a muted canvas of pewter clouds, and the road still glistened from a midnight drizzle that hadn't quite turned to rain. Logan Carter sat alone at the kitchen table, a lukewarm cup of coffee cradled in his hands, his gaze fixed on the small audio recorder lying in front of him. He hadn't slept. Not really. Shadow had paced the hallway twice during the night, ears twitching, body tense, returning to rest only when Logan's hands slid wordlessly across his broad head. Now, with Lila already gone on the bus and the morning pressing in like a question, Logan inhaled once and pressed play. The recorder whirred softly. Then, sounds of a classroom. Footsteps. Scraping chairs. Children speaking in low tones. Pages flipping. Then a voice. "Lila Carter," came the unmistakably sharp tone of a man. Measured, deep, and clipped with something colder than authority. "Your handwriting is illegible again." There was silence, then a faint shuffle. "You were told to rewrite the passage last night, were you not?" "I did," Lila's voice answered, barely above a whisper. "I tried." "You tried?" the voice repeated, rising just enough to sting. "Trying isn't enough. Not in this classroom. Bring your notebook." A pause, footsteps again. Then papers rustling. "You'll stand by the window? Maybe fresh air will help you concentrate since sitting hasn't." The audio crackled with background giggles. "She walks like a turtle," a young voice said, not Lila's. "A girl." Another voice snorted in laughter. "She doesn't even talk, just stares like a weirdo." The teacher didn't silence them. Logan paused the recording. He stared at the table for several seconds before pressing play again. One of the louder giggles, clear now, belonged to a girl's voice. "Why does she even come to school? She doesn't even try." Then Lila again, quieter than ever. "I'm trying, sir." Shadow, lying by the back door, lifted his head and let out a single sharp bark that made Logan jump. The dog stood, alert, eyes trained on the recorder, as if he too had heard something he recognized. Not the words themselves, but the fear laced within them. Logan turned off the recorder. He sat still, teeth clenched, heart thudding. This wasn't teasing. It wasn't a bad day. It was a pattern, and it was sanctioned. A name echoed in his mind, Mr. Grayson. He didn't know much about the man, just that he was new to Wakefield Elementary, hired after the previous second-grade teacher moved to another district. Logan remembered his face only vaguely from orientation, mid-30s, lean build, close-cropped dark hair, and narrow eyes set in a tired, angular face. He had the kind of voice that filled a room without shouting, and a way of smiling that never quite reached his eyes. Across town, in a modest rental home near Oak Ridge Drive, Thomas Grayson stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the collar of his shirt. He was 38, looked older in certain lighting, and kept his routines meticulous. A navy tie always, a pair of polished brown shoes, and a silver wedding band he still wore, though his wife had passed almost 4 years ago. Her name had been Ellen. She died one icy December morning on her way to pick up their daughter, Maggie, from ballet class. Her car had spun on a hidden patch of black ice and collided with a utility pole. She died instantly. Their daughter, 6 years old, never saw her again. Grayson hadn't missed a day of work since then, not because he enjoyed teaching, but because silence in his empty house was worse than any classroom noise. He didn't shout at his students. He didn't need to. He believed in structure, in precision, in discipline, and in his mind, those who failed to meet expectations had to be corrected. In his classroom, correction meant isolation, repetition, and a slow erosion of softness. He believed, perhaps truly, that he was preparing them for a world that had long stopped being kind. And then there was Ava Monroe. Ava, 8, was the kind of girl who always sat in the front row. Honey blonde hair always tied into twin braids, pressed uniform, and a notebook full of glittery stickers. She was smart, observant, and, unfortunately, quick to notice the vulnerabilities of others. Her father, Gregory Monroe, was a prominent real estate agent in Wakefield and a vocal member of the school's parent council. Ava had been the loudest laugh in the recording. Later that afternoon, Logan sat in his truck across from Wakefield Elementary. Shadow sat beside him in the passenger seat, head poking slightly out the open window, sniffing the breeze. The dog had refused to stay behind when Logan grabbed his keys. Logan hadn't argued. The final bell rang, and students began to pour from the building in loose lines. Lila was one of the last, her backpack slightly lopsided, her shoes muddy, one sock sliding down her ankle. She walked with her head down, clutching a small folder to her chest. Shadow whimpered the moment he saw her. Logan stepped out and crossed to meet her on the sidewalk. Lila blinked up, surprised. "Dad?" "I figured we'd walk home today," he said gently. Shadow nuzzled her hand. Lila smiled faintly, the kind that disappeared before it finished forming. As they turned to walk, Logan casually asked, "Who's Mr. Grayson?" Lila stiffened. "He's my teacher. Is he strict?" She paused, then nodded. "Is he fair?" This time she didn't answer. They walked the rest of the way in silence, but that night, after dinner, Logan retrieved the recording again. He sat with it, transcribed every word, and underlined one sentence twice. "I'm trying, sir." Rain had come during the night and left Wakefield washed in silver. Droplets clung to every branch, glittering beneath the first thin light of dawn. Logan Carter stood at the kitchen counter again, pouring cereal into a bowl with a mechanical precision that suggested he wasn't really awake. He hadn't touched the recorder since last night. He didn't need to. Every word of Mr. Grayson's cold commands and Ava's cruel laughter had embedded themselves in his memory. Across the hallway, Lila was tying her shoes with slow, practiced motions. Her uniform shirt was buttoned to the collar, but one sleeve was twisted, and she didn't notice. Her eyes remained distant, half-lidded like someone watching a memory behind glass. Shadow, sitting nearby, observed her intently, head tilted just slightly, as if trying to read her thoughts. He hadn't left her side all morning. When Logan bent down to grab her backpack from the hook near the door, something felt off. It was heavier than it should have been, far too heavy for a second grader's schoolwork. He unzipped the main compartment and reached in. His fingers hit cold, unyielding weight. Logan pulled out a brick, a standard construction-grade red brick, edges worn but solid. It had a small piece of masking tape stuck to the top, scribbled in purple ink. "Carry it till you learn to carry yourself." He stared at it, pulse spiking. Lila, realizing what he was holding, froze by the table. "Where did this come from?" he asked gently. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Her small hands tightened on the edge of her seat. "I didn't say anything yesterday," she whispered, "because they said if I told, they'd give me 2 bricks. Shadow let out a low, guttural growl. Logan stood slowly, the brick still in his hand. He set it down on the table and moved toward Lila, kneeling beside her. "Who made you carry this, Lila?" She looked at him then. Really looked, and shook her head. Not as a no, but as a plea not to make her say. Logan exhaled, his jaw tightening. The school would answer for this. Wakefield Elementary was still shaking off the rain when Logan arrived just after 8:30. He was dressed in a plain gray jacket and jeans, his face unreadable. Shadow remained in the truck, watching the front steps with unmoving intensity. Inside, the hallways smelled faintly of cleaner and wet shoes. Logan walked directly to the administrative wing, past the line of students hanging coats. He didn't knock before entering the front office. Behind a glass partition, Principal Dean Daniels sat at his desk, hunched over a spreadsheet printout. Daniels was a portly white man in his early 50s, bald on top with a shiny dome, tufts of gray at the sides. He wore a tan suit that didn't quite fit his rounded shoulders and wire-rimmed glasses that slid down his nose. His voice, when he finally looked up, was warm, but practiced. "Mr. Carter, is everything all right with Lila?" Logan didn't sit. He reached into his jacket and laid the brick on the counter between them with a quiet thud. Daniels blinked, adjusted his glasses. "That," Logan said flatly, "was in my daughter's backpack this morning." Daniels furrowed his brow, his voice slipping into institutional calm. "I see. And what would you like us to do about it?" "I'd like to know," Logan said, leaning in slightly, "what kind of school lets children carry building materials as punishment?" "Punishment?" Daniels repeated, as if the word were foreign. "Surely there's a misunderstanding. We don't authorize anything of that sort. If a student brought that brick, perhaps it was a prank?" "She didn't bring it," Logan said, jaw clenched. "She was told to carry it. There's a note on it." Daniels examined the tape, squinted, and then carefully pushed the brick back across the counter. "Without knowing who wrote this, we can't assign blame." Logan's eyes darkened. "I already have a recording from the classroom that says enough about Mr. Grayson. This," he tapped the brick, "isn't the first sign." Daniels raised both hands slightly, palms out. "Now, Mr. Carter, we appreciate your concern, but without direct proof that a staff member placed this in your daughter's bag, you mean you won't investigate?" "I'm saying," Daniels replied smoothly, "that this school has policies, and evidence is essential." Logan leaned closer. "Do you know what it feels like to carry a brick in your bag all day? When you're 7. Daniels hesitated for a second, then gave a small performative smile. "Let me assure you, Mr. Carter, we take all complaints seriously." Logan straightened. "Good, because I'm not finished filing them." He walked out without waiting for a reply. That night, back home, Logan sat at the dining table long after Lila had gone to bed. The brick sat beside him, heavy even in silence. Shadow lay at the foot of the stairs, ears twitching, eyes fixed on the front door. Twice already the dog had barked, deep, low bursts, at something or someone moving outside on the sidewalk. Logan checked, but no one was there. The neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet. And still, Shadow didn't rest. Logan opened his laptop and began to write. He composed a formal statement, logging the brick, the incident, the note, and the inaction from Principal Daniels. He attached it to an email, addressed not only to the school board, but also to the Wakefield Parent Committee. He hit send and sat back. Shadow shifted slightly, a growl rumbling in his throat again. Logan stood and locked the door, just in case. The sky above Wakefield had darkened by late afternoon, as if the clouds themselves had sensed tension in the air. A storm was forecast for the evening, but Logan Carter had already weathered one in his own mind. The parent-teacher conference was scheduled for 5:30 p.m., and by 5:10 he was standing alone beneath the oak tree in the school's courtyard, gripping the flash drive like a trigger. Shadow sat beside him, alert and steady. At nearly 8 years old, Shadow was beginning to show his age in the slight stiffness of his gait and the gray softening the tan fur around his muzzle, but his eyes were sharp. keen, focused. His tail barely moved, except when Lila's name was mentioned. Logan had considered leaving Shadow at home, but something told him to keep him near. As a soldier, he had always trusted his instincts. As a father, he was learning to trust them even more. The auditorium at Wakefield Elementary was modest. Beige walls, folding chairs, a few children's drawings taped to the back of the podium. There were only about 15 parents present, scattered in clumps, murmuring among themselves. At the front stood Mr. Grayson and Principal Daniels, both wearing neutral expressions and stiff postures. A table with juice boxes and cookies sat awkwardly to the side, untouched. Logan sat near the middle aisle, alone. Across the room sat Monica Monroe, Ava's mother. She was a striking woman in her late 30s, with sleek blonde hair pulled back into a professional bun, wearing a tailored navy dress that screamed control and money. Her expression was bored, her manicured fingers scrolling slowly through a phone, as if this gathering barely deserved her attention. When the introductions ended, Daniels opened the floor. If any parents would like to share feedback or concerns regarding the student experience, this is your space to do so. Logan stood up. The room shifted. "I'd like to share something," he said, voice steady but hard. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a portable speaker, and placed it on the table in front of him. "This is a recording from Mr. Grayson's classroom. The voice you'll hear belongs to my daughter, Lila Carter." Grayson flinched visibly. Logan pressed the play. The room went still as the audio filled the space. Lila's small voice, "I tried." The harsh reply, "Trying isn't enough." The giggles, "She walks like a turtle." The teacher again, "Stand by the window. Maybe fresh air will help you focus." By the end of the 2-minute clip, you could have heard a pin drop. Grayson stepped forward, his face rigid. "That recording was made without consent. It may be illegal, and it's taken entirely out of context." "Which part was out of context?" Logan interrupted calmly. "The part where a 7-year-old was humiliated, or the part where you did nothing about it?" Monica Monroe raised an eyebrow and stood. Her voice, cool and practiced, slid into the air like a polished blade. "Mr. Carter, I sympathize, but not every child thrives in structured environments. Lila may simply be sensitive. Ava says she often refuses to speak or participate." Logan turned to her. "And that justifies calling her names in front of the class?" "I'm not saying that," Monica replied with a tight smile. "But we shouldn't jump to conclusions. Sometimes, when children don't fit in, the issue isn't always external." The room shifted again. A father in the back adjusted his tie and looked down. A woman near the wall folded her arms, refusing eye contact. Daniels cleared his throat. "Perhaps this is a discussion best had in private." Logan stared at him, then slowly picked up the speaker and returned to his seat. The meeting ended without another word from him. Outside, the wind had picked up, pulling at the branches overhead. Logan walked back toward the truck. Shadow was already sitting upright in the passenger seat, tail stiff, ears up. A single piece of paper had been tucked beneath the windshield wiper. Logan pulled it free and opened it beneath the flickering streetlight. The handwriting was rushed, the ink smudged by rain. "If you want your daughter safe, stop digging. Some things are better left buried." Logan stared at it for a long moment, then folded it once, slid it into his coat pocket, and opened the door for Shadow. By the time Saturday morning broke over Wakefield, the storm had passed, leaving the town washed clean but colder. Sunlight glinted off rooftops still wet from the night's rain, and the air carried that unmistakable crispness of early November, the kind that made breath fog and fingers sting. Logan Carter stood on his porch, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, staring out toward the quiet street. Lila was still asleep upstairs, curled beneath 3 layers of blankets, her teddy bear tucked tight beneath her chin. Shadow lay at the doorway, head resting on his paws, but eyes wide open, tracking every movement across the yard. The old dog hadn't relaxed fully in days. Logan pulled out his phone and tapped a contact that had been saved in his address book for years but never used, Grace Martin. He didn't expect her to answer, but she did. "Logan?" Her voice was older than he remembered, but firm. "Grace, it's about Lila." There was a pause. "When can you come?" she asked. Grace Martin lived in a single-story brick house on the southern edge of town. Once a renowned investigative journalist, she had worked for major publications in her prime, an unflinching voice that exposed corruption in school districts, medical malpractice, and more. Now in her early 60s, she had retired early, claiming she was done yelling into the void, but she wasn't done listening. Grace was a tall, lean white woman with a crown of iron gray hair, usually tied into a low, messy bun. Her features were sharp. Hawk-like nose, narrow eyes behind thick black glasses, but not unkind. She wore old jeans and flannel shirts like armor, and always had a legal pad nearby, filled with handwritten notes in cramped script. She answered the door herself, holding a mug that read, "Never assume I'm done with this story." "Didn't think I'd see you before Thanksgiving," she said, ushering Logan and Shadow inside. "You look worse than usual." "Thanks," Logan muttered, stepping into her warm, book-stuffed home. "Where's the girl?" "With a neighbor. I didn't want her around for this." They sat at the kitchen table, Shadow taking his usual post beneath Logan's feet. Grace flipped open her notebook as Logan unfolded the story, from the recording to the brick, from the parent meeting to the anonymous note. Grace didn't interrupt once. When he finished, she leaned back, exhaled slowly, and tapped the pen against her pad. "This is a lot," she said. "I know. You said you still have the recordings?" "I do, all backed up." "And you trust your gut that something bigger is going on here?" Logan nodded. "They're protecting him. Or protecting something." Grace sipped her coffee. "Then we start with the classroom." The next week, Grace registered herself as a visiting educational consultant, a title vague enough to pass through administrative approval without raising red flags. Her cover story was simple. She was observing classroom environments to help develop statewide learning models. She had done this before. Shadow, wearing a new vest that read "Emotional Support Animal," accompanied her. He was perfect for the role. On Thursday morning, Logan dropped Lila off at school and parked across the street. Grace walked into the building through the front entrance, her satchel over one shoulder, and a small button cam clipped discreetly inside the plastic lining of her vest. Lila's classroom, room A3, was situated at the far end of the west hallway. The lights were bright, the walls lined with alphabet charts and motivational quotes. Everything looked safe. Until class began. Mr. Grayson walked in precisely at 8 a.m., tall, rigid white man in his late 30s with close-cropped black hair and a spotless navy tie. He didn't smile. He didn't greet anyone. He simply pulled out the attendance sheet and called names in a voice that could cut stone. Grace took a seat near the window, scribbling notes, her expression passive. When Lila hesitated on a spelling answer, Grayson made her stand. "That's the third mistake today, Lila. Please go stand by the door. Maybe some fresh air will help that memory." Some students snickered. Lila moved quietly, clutching her notebook. Grace watched. Her eyes didn't blink. Then she saw it again. Maxwell, a boy in the second row, rubbing his arms as if cold. His sweater was thin. She had read his file, free lunch student, mother works night shifts. He was one of the weaker readers. That day, he was asked to rewrite his sentences, while standing outside in 40-degree wind. "Miss Martin," Grayson said, turning, "I hope the classroom isn't too chaotic for you." "Not at all," Grace answered smoothly. "Quite enlightening." Shadow sat near her feet, still. But when Lila returned to her seat, his ears twitched and he rose slowly, walking over to her. The children stared, some stiffened. But Lila smiled, only faintly, and only for a second, and reached out to touch the dog's head. The classroom didn't erupt in laughter. It fell quiet. Later, during recess, Grace sat beneath the shade of the covered walkway, pretending to review her notes. Shadow lay beside her, tail still. That's when a girl approached. Her name was Emily Jensen, 8 years old, with curly strawberry blonde hair and a backpack almost as big as her. Her eyes darted around, then locked on Grace. "You're the visitor," Emily said. "I am," Grace replied. "I saw you watching Mr. Grayson." Grace paused, cautious. "Do you like Mr. Grayson?" Emily shook her head quickly, then pulled up her sleeve to show a faint mark on her forearm. "He grabbed my arm last week, said I wasn't holding the pencil properly." Grace's expression didn't change. "Did you tell anyone?" "My mom works at the diner. She said not to make trouble." Grace leaned in slightly. "Would you like me to talk to someone for you?" Emily looked at Shadow, then nodded. Back at home that evening, Logan read Grace's field notes, while Lila sat quietly on the floor drawing pictures of Shadow. Each page showed the same figure, pointed ears, kind eyes, standing beside a girl holding his leash. Some pages had more than one child. "He helps the others too," Lila whispered. Grace packed away her recorder. "We have enough," she said. "But?" Logan asked. Grace looked out the window, her eyes hard. "But if we speak too early, they'll bury it before it breathes." Logan's hand rested on Shadow's head. "Then we wait," he said, "until it's too big to bury." The sky over Wakefield had turned a cold, mottled gray by dawn, the kind of color that made even streetlights seem dim. A light sleet misted across rooftops and sidewalks, brushing every surface with a brittle sheen. At Logan's house, the porch light flickered on as he stepped outside with Shadow, the old German shepherd walking slowly at his side, nose twitching. Logan had slept barely 3 hours, not from fear, but from readiness. Ever since Grace had sent the article to her old network, their world had shifted. And not quietly. Grace Martin's blog post had dropped at 5:47 a.m., under the title, "The Silence in Room A3. It wasn't hosted on a flashy media site, no hashtags, no ads, just words, recordings, still images, and truth. By 8:15 a.m., it had been shared over 10,000 times. The article laid out everything. Audio of Mr. Grayson berating Lila. Video stills of students standing outside the school in freezing weather. A timeline of incidents going back 2 years. A blurred testimony from Jessica Hart, a now teenage former student with blonde hair, braces, and eyes that never stopped watching the floor. Jessica had once reported a teacher for discipline practices, but no action had been taken. She agreed to speak on record, with her name redacted. Grace, sitting at her kitchen counter that morning with 3 phones vibrating in turns, smiled grimly. "It's already out of their hands," she muttered to herself. "Now let's see who scrambles first." The school district responded faster than expected. At noon, a formal notice was sent. Mr. Grayson was suspended with pay pending investigation. By 2 p.m., Principal Daniels had quietly removed his nameplate from the door and requested personal leave. His car left the parking lot 30 minutes later. The town buzzed. Local media picked up the story by evening. Former students and teachers began speaking out, many anonymously, some boldly. Grace forwarded the interviews to Logan. One stood out, a cafeteria worker named Benji Rivera. Mid-40s, Hispanic, wide-shouldered with thick-rimmed glasses and the air of someone always watching but rarely speaking. He claimed he'd seen kids turned away from the lunch line based on behavior reports. "I didn't know what to do," Benji had told Grace in a raspy voice. "When I tried asking questions, Daniels told me it was above my pay grade." That evening, as Logan made dinner, Lila quietly helping with the silverware, his phone buzzed. A blocked number. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Then a message. "Stop or lose your daughter." Logan's jaw tightened. He handed the phone to Grace, who was reading across the room with Shadow at her feet. She looked at the screen, then up at him. "We expected this," Logan nodded. "Doesn't make it easier." That night, Logan set up additional security around the house. Motion lights, cameras on each corner, locks reinforced. Shadow followed his every move, tail low, movements slower than usual. The dog had been acting off all day. Less alert, less responsive. Grace noticed it first. "He's been lying near the heater all afternoon," she said. Logan crouched beside him, gently lifting Shadow's paw. The pads were warm. Too warm. "What did you eat today, boy?" he asked, more to himself than the dog. Then he found it. A small clump of meat half chewed behind the porch swing. Logan brought it inside, placed it in a sealed bag, and stared at it for a long time. "Laced," he muttered. Grace sniffed the air above the meat. "Barbiturates, maybe. Not enough to kill, just silence." They rushed Shadow to Dr. Hannah Lynn, the local vet, an Asian-American woman in her late 30s, soft-spoken with steady hands and kind eyes. Her clinic was dimly lit, quiet at this hour. Hannah examined Shadow carefully, running quick talk screens. "He's lucky," she said, running her hand along the dog's flank. "Whoever did this didn't know his weight. A few milligrams more and—" Logan looked away. "I'll keep him here overnight," Hannah added. "IV fluids, monitoring. He should be himself by morning." "Thanks," Logan whispered. As they left the clinic, Grace turned to him. "You still in?" He looked at her. The lines under his eyes seemed deeper now, but not tired, just carved. I was in the second, Lila whispered. I'm trying, sir. Back at home, Logan checked the house 3 more times before finally sitting on the floor beside Lila's room, back against the wall. Inside, his daughter slept soundly, her breath even, a faint glow of nightlight casting soft shadows over her tiny desk and bookshelf. Grace came down the hallway with a blanket. You're not doing this alone anymore, she said, laying it over his shoulders, and neither is she. He didn't answer, but nodded slowly. Because some battles weren't about winning, they were about standing. The morning sun filtered through pale autumn clouds, casting soft light across the sidewalks of Hillcrest Elementary, a modest school nestled between a grove of maple trees and a retired fire station in the quieter side of Wakefield. Wind stirred golden leaves across the empty playground as Logan stepped out of his truck, holding his daughter's hand. Shadow padded behind them, a little slower than usual, but with ears perked, eyes bright and alert once more. Hillcrest was smaller, quieter, and kinder looking. Its red brick walls slightly faded, but its windows clean, adorned with construction paper stars and smiling pumpkins. The air even smelled different here, warmer, like pencil shavings and fresh bread. Lila wore her freshly washed white school uniform under a navy cardigan, her hair neatly braided by Grace earlier that morning. A soft pink Band-Aid still clung to her cheek from a scrape the week before, but her steps today were different, more balanced, less hesitant. She clutched her backpack tightly, but not in fear. It was more like holding something precious. The school's front door opened, and out stepped Miss Joy Whitaker, a white woman in her late 50s with salt and pepper curls, a gently rounded figure, and a scarf covered in cartoon frogs. Her glasses hung from a cheerful sunflower chain, and her smile reached both corners of her face like light spilling from a lamp. You must be Lila, she said warmly, crouching to eye level. We've saved a seat for you, right by the window. Lila nodded slowly. Okay. And you must be Shadow. Miss Whitaker held out her hand, palm up. The old K9 sniffed, gave a gentle tail wag, and sat beside Lila like a sentry. The teacher laughed softly. You're even more handsome than in the photos. Logan smiled, tension melting from his shoulders. Thank you for making this so human. We believe in safe beginnings, she replied, even if it's not the first day. Inside, Hillcrest hummed gently. The classroom walls were hand-painted in ocean blues and meadow greens. The desks were rounded, not squared. Everything felt intentional. A place where childhood wasn't just allowed, but protected. Lila was introduced at morning circle, where a group of 20 children sat cross-legged on a colorful carpet shaped like the solar system. When Miss Whitaker gently nudged her to share something about herself, Lila paused. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve. I like animals, she said, voice no louder than a whisper. And Shadow is your dog? One boy asked. She nodded. Cool, the boy replied, and the circle moved on. In the hour that followed, something happened. Lila raised her hand, not once, but twice. The first time was to read aloud. She stumbled on some words but kept going. Miss Whitaker smiled the whole time. The second was during art class. The assignment was simple. Draw someone who helps you feel safe. Lila's drawing was of Shadow. His fur was more orange than black, but his eyes were perfect, kind, brave, and watching. Around him, she'd drawn stars. At lunchtime, Shadow was officially welcomed as a classroom guest. Logan had asked for permission, unsure if it would be allowed. But the principal, Mr. Evan Fletcher, a tall white man in his early 60s with silver hair, a tweed blazer, and the calm voice of someone who'd seen many storms, insisted on it. We could use more heroes around here, Mr. Fletcher had said, four-legged or not. Shadow sat peacefully on a soft mat near the bookshelf. Children came up one by one, whispering stories, offering drawn pictures, and scratching gently behind his ears. For each gesture, Shadow offered quiet patience. He didn't flinch, didn't startle. He simply stayed. Later that afternoon, Logan waited outside, leaning against the truck. Grace had offered to bring coffee but stayed behind. Let this one be yours, she'd said. As Lila stepped out of the building with Shadow beside her, she was holding a stack of crayon drawings and a folded note. She climbed into the truck and passed it to her father. It read, in uneven but heartfelt handwriting, "Thank you for giving your dog to our class. He makes me feel brave." Noah. Logan stared at it for a long moment. His fingers trembled. Then came the message. A ping on his phone, this time not from a blocked number. It was from a group of parents, names he didn't recognize at first. Mrs. Ellison, Mr. Greaves, Miss Randall. The message simply read, "Thank you for not backing down. Our kids didn't know how to speak, but now they're starting to." Attached were photos, smiling children, safe classrooms, and 2 more dogs sitting calmly beside desks. One was a therapy poodle, the other, a mutt with a bandana that read, "I'm a listener." Lila was looking out the window, but not blankly. Not this time. Her eyes were following birds overhead, and she was humming. Shadow, curled in the back seat, opened one eye. His tail tapped once. That night, at dinner, Lila asked a question she hadn't asked in weeks. "Daddy, can I bring my new drawing to Mom's picture?" Logan froze, then smiled. "Yeah, sweetheart, she'd love that." June mornings in Shady Grove carried the kind of still warmth that felt earned, like the exhale after a long winter sigh. Sunlight filtered through the sycamores lining Rose Hill Elementary's modest front lawn, painting golden patches across the sidewalk. The school itself was no grand structure, just 3 low-slung red brick wings with faded blue trim. But to Logan, it felt like a sanctuary, a last refuge where a wounded spirit had finally found room to grow. Inside the small auditorium, parents filled folding chairs arranged in gentle arcs facing a stage no more than 2 feet off the ground. Homemade banners hung crookedly from the ceiling beams. "End of year celebration," one read, the letters drawn by children's hands, each colored with wild, confident joy. Logan Reeves sat in the 3rd row, his arms crossed over his chest, but his knuckles white. He wore a blue plaid shirt, jeans pressed flat for the occasion, and his wedding ring. Polished, worn, but present. Beside him, Shadow sat upright, his black and tan fur brushed to a clean shine. Though officially retired, the 9-year-old German Shepherd wore a green bandana that read, "Class Friend," in cheerful block letters. Around his neck, someone had tied a paper medallion that said, "Most Loyal." Logan leaned down and whispered, "You ready, buddy?" Shadow's ears perked, and he gave a low, quiet woof. It was enough. Principal Evan Fletcher, a tall white man with silver hair and a bow tie that screamed school spirit, stepped up to the mic with a wide grin. "Thank you everyone for joining us. Before we get to the ice cream and sidewalk chalk, we have one last surprise." The microphone squeaked as he adjusted it. "One of our students asked to share something today. A short essay. Her name's Lila Reeve." Logan froze. There was a brief shuffle of tiny shoes against the floor. From behind the curtain emerged Lila, wearing a clean white blouse and a navy jumper. Her blonde hair, freshly brushed but still frizzing slightly at the ends, bounced at her shoulders. She walked slowly, not timidly, but with the focus of someone who knew what she was about to do mattered. Miss Whitaker gave her an encouraging squeeze on the shoulder as she passed, and Lila climbed the 2 wooden steps to the microphone. She cleared her throat once. "My name is Lila," she said, her voice soft but steady. "And this is my essay. It's called My Hero." She held a single sheet of paper with a ladybug sticker in the top corner. Her hands trembled only slightly. "My hero doesn't fly. He doesn't wear a cape. My hero doesn't even like talking to people much, but he listens. He always listens." Logan blinked. Shadow shifted and pressed his side against Logan's boot. "My hero works hard, even when it's scary. He showed me that even if the world is unfair, you don't have to be. You can be brave anyway. You can protect people, especially when no one else does." A murmur passed through the crowd, quiet, reverent. "I have 2 heroes," Lila continued. "One is my dad. He came when I couldn't shout. He heard me when no one else did. The other..." She paused and looked down at Shadow. "The other is my dog, Shadow. He doesn't talk, but he always knows." Several adults near the front wiped their eyes. "When I was scared, he sat with me. When I was hurt, he found out. When I was quiet, he stayed." Her voice cracked once, but she didn't stop. "My heroes saved me. They didn't have to, but they did. And because of that, I know how to be one now too. Maybe not with strength, but with kindness, and with listening." There was silence. Then, As if a single breath had been held and released across the whole auditorium, came applause. Not thunderous, but full, warm, honest. Logan stood, wiping the corner of his eye. Shadow remained seated, watching Lila with that strange, knowing tilt of the head that Logan had never been able to explain. The kind of look that said, "I saw you." That said, "I was there." Later, after the crowd thinned and the celebration turned to laughter and chalk drawings and sticky-fingered children chasing bubbles, Lila sat on the grass next to Shadow. He lay down, his tail swishing softly. "I think you knew," she whispered into his fur, "even before I did." Shadow didn't move, but he didn't have to. At the edge of the field, Logan stood beside Miss Whitaker and Principal Fletcher. Several parents, some who had once sent angry emails, some who had once averted their eyes, approached him one by one. Some shook his hand. Others only nodded. One woman, the mother of a boy named Eli, simply said, "Thank you for not giving up." Logan didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded, blinking against the sun. Grace Martin sent a text later that evening. "Saw the live stream. Nailed it. Your kid's got guts." Logan responded with a picture. Lila and Shadow asleep on the porch swing, the paper medallion still hanging from Shadow's neck. That night, under a sky washed in silver moonlight, Logan looked out over the quiet backyard. The wind rustled gently through the trees. It was peaceful, not perfect, but finally at peace. Sometimes, the loudest cries are the ones never spoken, and the strongest heroes come on 4 legs, not 2. In a world that often turns away, this story reminds us of something deeper. That love listens, that courage kneels, and that maybe, just maybe, God sends his angels with fur and paws. Shadow didn't need words to understand pain. Logan didn't need proof to fight for his child. And little Lila, with a cracked whisper and trembling hands, didn't need to be loud. She just needed someone to truly hear her. If you believe that miracles don't always look like lightning from the sky, but sometimes like an old soldier, a broken little girl, and a dog who never gave up, then share this story. Leave a comment if your heart was touched. Subscribe if you believe more stories like this should be told. And most importantly, comment Amen if you believe God still sends his love through the most unexpected messengers. May he bless you and protect every silent voice still waiting to be heard.